Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. I'm really glad you're here. Today we're diving into another adventure, full of mystery, magic, and surprises. So stick around, you won't want to miss it. In today's episode, we have a series of little silly events from our friends in the forest, entitled Tales from the Grove. It had been a gentle morning in the woods, soft mist weaving between the tall birches and the quiet whisper of leaves carrying the promise of rain. Hedgehog had woken early, his little nose twitching at the dampness in the air. Rain today, he muttered to himself, shaking off sleep as he shuffled from his burrow. He wasn't wrong. By the time he had boiled his kettle and placed a slice of bread near the fire to toast, the first drops were pattering softly against the windows of his snug little home. Hedgehog rather liked the rain, so long as it wasn't stormy. It meant he could wear his green cloak, pull up the hood, and feel quite grand as he trotted along the muddy paths. Best fetch some carrots from Rabbit, he decided, for his pantry was running a little thin, and perhaps stop by Squirrels for some nuts. Yes, a nice stew will do for supper. With his mind made up, Hedgehog buttoned his cloak, fetched his walking stick, and set out. The rain came heavier now, filling the air with a fresh, earthy smell. Along the way, he met Mole, who was struggling under a rather battered umbrella. "Mole, you'll blow away if you're not careful." Hedgehog chuckled, steadying his friend. "Oh, this umbrella," Mole grumbled. "It turns inside out every other step. I was just on my way to Badger's to borrow a sturdier one." "Well then, walk with me," Hedgehog said kindly. "We'll get you there quicker," and I was heading that way after Rabbit's. The two friends walked on, puddles splashing under their little boots, the woods alive with the hush of rainfall. Birds were quieter than usual, sheltering beneath the thick branches, though a blackbird sang cheerily despite the drizzle. At Rabbit's burrow, they found Rabbit at the doorway, trying very hard to sweep water away with a broom. Come in," Rabbit called. "You'll catch cold out there. I've just pulled some carrots, and they're yours for the stew, Hedgehog." Inside was warm, with the smell of fresh herbs hanging from the ceiling. Rabbit poured them each a small cup of tea, while Mole carefully folded up his troublesome umbrella, glaring at it as though it had personally offended him. "Why not stay a while till the rain eases?" Rabbit suggested, but Hedgehog shook his head. "A stew won't make itself, and besides, errands don't stop for a bit of drizzle." Rabbit laughed. "Only you would say something like that." So, with carrots packed, Hedgehog and Mole stepped back out into the rain, ready to carry on with their little woodland errands. The rain had made the woodland paths muddy and slick, but the two friends trudged cheerfully on. Hedgehog's hood flopped forward over his eyes now and then, while Mole's umbrella had, predictably, blown inside out once again. Their path took them past the small stream that wound lazily through the woods. Normally, it was an easy hop across the stepping stones, but today the rain had swelled it into something a little wilder. The stones were half submerged, slippery with rushing water. "Oh dear," Mole muttered, peering nervously at the stream. "We'll never get across like that." "Nonsense," Hedgehog said, tapping his stick against one of the stones. "We'll just have to take it slow." Slow, however, was not quite in Mole's nature when faced with water. He gave a brave little leap and landed straight in with a splash. Hedgehog sighed, but couldn't help laughing as Mole scrambled out, dripping from head to toe. "Don't laugh," Mole squeaked indignantly, though his whiskers quivered with a grin. "It's not funny. Not funny at all," Hedgehog replied, still chuckling. "Come on, let's get you to Badger's. He'll have a towel big enough for the both of us." The two eventually managed to cross, Hedgehog steady and sure, Mole clinging tightly to his hand. They climbed the muddy bank and pressed on, passing beneath tall trees whose dripping leaves shook droplets down their collars. By the time they reached Badger's snug den, Mole was sneezing and Hedgehog's cloak was soaked through. Badger, large and solemn, opened the door at once. "Well, you look like a pair of drowned acorns," he said, though his voice carried warmth. "Come in, get yourselves dry. I'll just put the kettle on." Inside, Badger's den was dark and comfortable, lined with books and old chairs that looked as though they had grown out of the ground itself. A fire crackled in the grate, and the smell of roasted chestnuts filled the room. "Now then," Badger said, bustling about with towels, "tell me what business you two had tramping through weather like this." "Carrots," Hedgehog answered simply, holding up his little bundle. Badger shook his head, though a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Carrots, indeed. You're incorrigible, Hedgehog." By the time the rain eased into a gentle drizzle, Hedgehog and Mole were dry, warm, and full of chestnuts and tea. Mole had even borrowed a stout walking stick from Badger to replace his ruined umbrella, though he grumbled that it wasn't quite the same. The woods glistened now, raindrops hanging from branches, moss shining bright green, and puddles reflecting the silver sky. Birds had returned to their songs, and somewhere in the distance, a woodpecker tapped steadily at a tree. They parted ways at the fork in the path, Mole heading down toward his cozy tunnel home, while Hedgehog turned toward his burrow with a bundle of carrots under one arm. When Hedgehog reached home at last, he shook off his cloak, set a small pot on the fire, and chopped the carrots with care. Soon, the stew bubbled gently, filling the burrow with a delicious smell. Outside, the rain stopped altogether, and a pale beam of sunlight slipped through the damp leaves, glinting on the windows. Hedgehog ladled out his stew, settled in his chair, and sighed with contentment. "It's a fine thing," he said aloud, "to have good friends on a rainy day." And with that, he ate his supper, listening to the soft drip of water outside, the woods peaceful once more. It was one of those mornings where the sun came gently through the mist, painting the woods in soft light. Hedgehog stepped out of his burrow, cloak fastened neatly, staff in hand, humming a little tune. But halfway down the path, he stopped short and frowned. His cloak hung loose at the top. One of his shiny brass buttons was gone. "Oh, bother!" Hedgehog exclaimed, patting the edges of his cloak. He checked the ground, but the button was nowhere to be seen. A cloak without a button is no cloak at all. How am I to look respectable visiting my friends? So, with a sigh, he retraced his steps, nose close to the ground. Along the way, he met Robin, who perched on a low branch, cocking his head curiously. "What are you searching for, Hedgehog?" Robin chirped. "My button," Hedgehog replied gravely. "A fine brass one, polished only yesterday. Without it, I fear my cloak will flap about disgracefully." Robin fluttered his wings. "I'll help. From up here, I can see things you cannot." And so began a morning's search. Mole was called upon, for his eyes were sharp when it came to spotting things in the dirt. Squirrel joined too, scampering through the grass, lifting leaves and muttering, "If I were a button, where would I hide?" At last, it was little Field Mouse who squeaked out triumphantly, "Here, beneath the toadstool." And indeed, there lay the shiny button, half buried in the soil. Hedgehog dusted it off and fastened it back in place with a relieved sigh. "Friends, you have saved me from certain disgrace. How can I thank you?" "By joining us for tea," Squirrel piped up. So, the button restored, Hedgehog followed his friends to Squirrel's home, where tea, biscuits, and laughter filled the room. What had begun as a morning of frustration turned into a cheerful gathering, all thanks to a missing button. Mole was not much of a cook. He would admit this himself with a shy laugh and a twitch of his whiskers. But one damp afternoon, he announced to the woods, "I'm going to bake a cake." The animals were, understandably, skeptical. Hedgehog raised his brows. Squirrel tilted his head. Even Rabbit paused from munching on a carrot to murmur, "Are you sure, Mole?" But Mole was determined. He borrowed flour from Rabbit, honey from the bees, and berries from Squirrel's stores. He rolled up his sleeves, tied an apron twice too big for him, and set to work in his cozy kitchen. Flour dusted his nose. Honey stuck to his whiskers. Eggs wobbled dangerously on the counter. Yet Mole hummed happily as he mixed, stirred, and poured. When at last the cake was ready, Mole proudly set it on the windowsill to cool. It was a lopsided thing, leaning dangerously to one side, but it smelled heavenly. Soon, word spread, and the friends gathered. Hedgehog took the first slice, Mole watching nervously. Hedgehog chewed, paused, and broke into a wide grin. "Mole, this is marvelous," he declared. One by one, the others tried it, and their smiles confirmed it. The cake was delicious. Sweet, berry-filled, and just the right amount of crumbly. Mole beamed, his chest puffed with pride. "Well then," he said, brushing flour from his paws, "perhaps I'll bake again." That evening, the little kitchen glowed with warmth and laughter, crumbs on the table and mugs of tea all around. Mole had not only baked a cake, but had given his friends a new reason to gather and share joy. As autumn deepened, the days grew shorter, and the evenings arrived cloaked in cool mist. Hedgehog had an idea, as he so often did. Why not have a lantern walk? He suggested one crisp afternoon. The others loved the notion. Each animal set about making their own lanterns. Squirrel crafted his from a hollowed gourd, painting it with swirls of gold. Mole used a sturdy glass jar, carefully punching tiny holes in its lid so the candle inside could breathe. Rabbit, ever practical, made 3 lanterns at once, just in case. When night fell, the woods came alive with soft, flickering light. The friends walked the winding paths, lanterns swinging, voices chatting in cheerful tones. The trees seemed to lean close, curious about the little parade of glowing lights beneath their branches. Robin flew ahead, calling out warnings of puddles and roots. Hedgehog tapped his staff on the ground with each step, steady and proud. Mole stumbled now and then, but his lantern never once went out. They walked until they reached the riverbank, where the water reflected their lanterns like a ribbon of stars. There they sat together, sipping warm cider from small flasks and watching the moon rise. "It feels," Rabbit said softly, "as though the whole forest is joining us tonight." And indeed, the owls hooted, the fox watched from afar, and the wind itself whispered gently through the trees, carrying the glow of the lanterns deeper into the night. It was simple, it was small, but for the woodland friends, it was nothing short of magical. One blustery morning, Rabbit stood in the middle of his garden, paws on hips, glaring fiercely at a large old stump that had sat in the way for far too long. "It blocks the sunlight from my carrots," he muttered, "and every time I dig, my spade hits its roots. Today it must go." Armed with determination and a small shovel, Rabbit began to dig. He dug around the roots, grunting and sweating, but the stump refused to budge. He tried pushing, pulling, even tying a rope around it and tugging with all his strength. The stump, however, remained smugly in place. Squirrel appeared first, tail twitching with curiosity. "What are you doing, Rabbit?" "Removing this stump," Rabbit panted. Squirrel laughed. "That stump has been here longer than any of us. You won't shift it alone." Soon Hedgehog arrived, staff in hand, and Mole too, carrying a spade twice his size. Together, they dug and pulled, yet still the stump did not move. At last, Field Mouse squeaked. "Perhaps we don't need to move it. Perhaps we can make it useful instead." And so, rather than fighting the stump, the friends worked together to carve a flat top, smooth its edges, and decorate it with moss and little stones. By evening, the stubborn stump had transformed into a charming garden seat. Rabbit, though grumpy at first, soon found it rather pleasant. Well, he admitted, sitting down with a sigh, it does make a fine spot for tea. The friends gathered around, mugs in paw, and the stump, once a nuisance, became a new meeting place, forever known as Rabbit's Table. The rain had been steady all week, drumming softly on leaves and burrows alike. Hedgehog, however, loved the rain. He appeared one morning carrying an enormous green leaf above his head, tied neatly to his staff like an umbrella. "What do you think?" Hedgehog asked proudly. Robin fluttered down, eyeing it with admiration. "That's splendid. Could you make me one?" And so, Hedgehog spent the afternoon crafting leaf umbrellas for all his friends. Mole's was made of a broad dock leaf, Rabbit's of stitched together sycamore, and Squirrel's of a vivid red maple leaf. Soon the woodland paths were full of animals strolling under colorful leafy canopies, giggling and chatting in the drizzle. When the rain grew heavier, they turned the parade into a game. Who could keep their umbrella upright the longest? Rabbits collapsed first with a soggy plop, Moles tore at the edges, and Squirrels caught the wind and went sailing into the air, carrying Squirrel with it for several dizzying moments. Hedgehogs, of course, held steady. "It's all in the stitching," he explained with a smug smile. At the end of the day, soaked and laughing, the animals gathered at Rabbit's Table to dry their paws and share a warm pot of soup. The rain drummed on, but beneath their leafy umbrellas, the forest felt cheerful and bright. One chilly afternoon, Mole was trudging home when he stumbled upon something curious by the path. A tiny red boot, worn at the sole but clearly belonging to someone. He picked it up, frowning. Whose could this be? He carried it carefully to Hedgehog, who examined it with a serious air. Too small for Rabbit, too bright for Squirrel. It must belong to Field Mouse. Indeed, when they visited Field Mouse's burrow, she let out a squeak of relief. "Oh, thank goodness. I've been searching everywhere. It slipped off yesterday while I was gathering berries." Field Mouse tried it on, but found it still damp and muddy. "It needs a good clean," she sighed. So the friends set to work. Hedgehog scrubbed it with moss, Mole polished it with dry leaves, and Squirrel found a bright thread to mend the loose seam. By the time they were done, the little red boot looked better than ever. Field Mouse slipped it on and twirled about with joy. "You've saved my poor foot from freezing," she cried. That evening, she invited everyone into her cozy burrow for warm milk and seed cakes as thanks. The boots sat by the fire, drying gently, while the friends shared stories late into the night. "Funny, isn't it?" Hedgehog mused, "how even the smallest things can bring us together." And the others agreed, raising their mugs in a toast to the little lost boot that had turned an ordinary afternoon into something memorable. The morning mist clung gently to the meadow as Bramble Hedge stirred awake. Sunlight filtered down through the high canopy, dappling the moss with shifting patches of gold. Sedge the Hedgehog stretched his short arms and snuffled about for breakfast, while Pip the Squirrel darted from branch to branch, testing out the firmness of new hazelnuts. It was, by all accounts, an ordinary morning, except for the fact that old Moss the Badger had vanished. He wasn't usually one to wander without notice. His slow but steady plodding was as reliable as the tick of the great oak shadow. By mid-morning, Clover the Field Mouse raised her whiskers anxiously. "He was meant to bring the basket of herbs from the riverbank," she said, her tiny paws fidgeting with the hem of her apron. "But he's not come back." The little group gathered. Pip leapt down, Hazel the Hare padded over, and Sedge shuffled up beside them. "Maybe he's fallen asleep halfway again," said Pip with a grin. "Last week he dozed off right in the middle of a nettle patch." But when they followed his faint trail through the dew-laden grass, they discovered something more troublesome. A scattering of paw prints led right into the densest blackberry thicket in the wood, and from within came a muffled, exasperated growl. Confound these prickles. I'm well and truly stuck. Sure enough, old Moss was wedged fast inside the bramble maze, his fur tangled with thorns, his herb basket tipped sideways, and spilling chamomile and mint everywhere. He must have taken a shortcut and paid the price. The friends set to work at once. Pip climbed to snip at the vines from above, while Hazel used her strong legs to hold back bending branches. Clover carefully freed Moss's fur from the thorns, one tug at a time, while Sedge gathered the scattered herbs back into the basket. It was slow, prickly work, and more than once Pip got his tail caught. But by noon, Moss lumbered out, scratched yet smiling. "You saved me from becoming part of the hedge," he chuckled, "though I dare say the brambles won this round." They all laughed, and back at Clover's burrow they brewed a pot of mint tea with the rescued leaves. The day ended not with worry but with cheer, the lesson clear. Shortcuts seldom save time, but friends always did. A week later, something unusual stirred beneath the willow roots by the brook. Late one evening, as the forest grew dusky and lantern fireflies rose, Hazel's ears twitched. "Listen," she whispered to Pip. "Do you hear that?" It was a hollow tapping sound, rhythmic and deep, as if someone far underground were knocking on a wooden door. Pip tilted his head. "Perhaps it's the river shifting the stones," he said, but his whiskers quivered with curiosity. By morning, the whole woodland was abuzz. Clover insisted it was just the echo of water. Moss grunted that it might be a mole digging too noisily, but Pip was determined to find out. With Hazel and Sedge at his side, he scampered toward the brook and peered under the great willow. The noise came again. Tap, tap, tap. They dug gently near the roots, brushing away damp soil and weaving vines. To their astonishment, they uncovered a hollow chamber, an old storage nook from long ago, built by woodland creatures whose names were now forgotten. Inside were tiny shelves carved into the root walls, holding cracked jars, faded ribbons, and one tiny flute made of reed. "It's beautiful," Clover whispered when she joined them. "But who knocked?" No one could answer. They carried the flute back, and that night, Pip polished it clean and blew a trembling note. The sound carried across the meadow, and from deep in the roots came one last faint echo, like an answering hum, before silence fell forever. The mystery was never solved, but the flute found a new home on Clover's mantle. On evenings when the wind was gentle, she would play a tune, and all would swear the forest listened closer than usual. One late summer afternoon, the sky grew heavy with dark clouds. The air smelled sharp and metallic, the way it always did before a downpour. Sedge had gone out early to gather mushrooms, but when the rain broke, it came not as a sprinkle but a flood. Sheets of water poured through the forest paths, sending leaves spinning and rivulets rushing down every slope. By the time Pip and Hazel realized Sedge hadn't come home, the rain had swollen the brook into a torrent. "We must find him," Hazel declared. "He'll never make it back through this." They trudged into the storm, ears flattened and fur plastered to their sides. The woods looked different now. Branches whipped in the wind, and the paths they knew so well were hidden under mud and water. At last, they found Sedge clinging to the roots of an elm tree, his basket of mushrooms long swept away. "I slipped," he called out, his voice nearly drowned by the rain. "The water's too fast. I can't cross." With quick thinking, Pip leapt onto a low branch stretching across the flood and lowered his tail like a rope. Hazel waded in halfway, steady as a rock, while Clover urged Sedge forward. Inch by inch, they pulled him across until he tumbled safely onto the bank, shivering but unharmed. By the time they reached Clover's burrow again, soaked to the bone, she already had a kettle on the fire. They huddled together with steaming mugs of nettle tea and laughed shakily at their adventure. "Next time," Sedge muttered, I'll only gather mushrooms when the sky is blue. They all agreed. But deep down, each of them knew that even in storms and floods, none of them would ever truly be alone. Morning light brought calm. Hedgehog curled up in his den for a nap. Mouse found her way to her tiny nook lined with moss, and Owl rested quietly on his favorite perch, eyes closing at last. The mystery of the night slipped into the background, tucked away like a half-remembered dream. When they awoke later that day, life had returned to its ordinary rhythm. The forest was full of the simple tasks that filled their days: gathering food, tending to their homes, sharing company by the stream. Mouse was the first to stir. She padded down to the riverbank, where the water ran clear over smooth stones. With her paws, she gathered little twigs to patch her nest. She hummed softly to herself, comforted by the sound of the flowing stream. Soon, Hedgehog trundled out of the underbrush, carrying a bundle of dry leaves balanced clumsily on his back. "Morning, Mouse," he called, dropping them onto the bank. "Thought you might need some for lining your nest." Mouse smiled, whiskers twitching. "You always bring the best ones, soft and not too brittle." "Thank you, Hedgehog." Owl arrived last, swooping down with a small branch in his beak. He dropped it neatly beside the others and ruffled his feathers. "For the roof of Mouse's nook," he explained. "Storms will come eventually. Best to be ready." Mouse blinked up at him gratefully. "You two think of everything. With friends like you, my little home will be strong enough to last through any season." The three spent the afternoon by the river, working side by side. Hedgehog stacked leaves and bark, Owl searched for sturdier sticks, and Mouse carefully tucked each piece into her walls and ceiling. The project wasn't grand, just a cozy nest tucked beneath the roots of a tree. But to Mouse it felt like a palace, made more precious by the effort of friends. When at last they were finished, the nook looked warmer, safer, and more welcoming than ever before. Mouse stood in the doorway, paws clasped. "Oh, it's perfect. Come inside. You must see how snug it feels." Hedgehog squeezed in first, filling the small space with his round frame. "Ah," he said, stretching out with satisfaction. "So soft. You'll sleep well in here." Owl followed, careful not to disturb the roof. He settled into a corner, his feathers brushing gently against the moss. "Yes," he agreed, "this will serve you well, and it will be a place we can gather to when the nights grow colder." Mouse's heart swelled. She had always worried her home was too small to share, but somehow with Hedgehog's leaves and Owl's sticks, it felt just right. Later, when the sun dipped low and painted the water in shades of gold, the friends sat together on the smooth stones of the riverbank. Hedgehog munched contentedly on a few berries. Owl watched the ripples with calm eyes, and Mouse leaned back against a warm patch of stone, sighing with relief. The forest whispered around them in the ordinary way now, just the wind in the leaves, the rustle of a squirrel in the distance, the bubbling of the stream. Cozy, simple, and safe. Hedgehog finally broke the quiet. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "last night's path was strange and maybe a little frightening. But this is what I love. Just us, the river, the work we did together. It's enough." Mouse nodded. "Adventures come and go, but the everyday things, they're what make me happiest." Owl hooted softly, a sound of agreement. "And yet," he added, "sometimes it is the mystery that reminds us to cherish the ordinary. We saw something rare, and now this dream feels all the more precious." The three friends smiled at one another, warmed not only by the evening sun, but by the quiet understanding between them. The forest, vast and filled with secrets, could wait. For now, they had each other, their homes, and the steady rhythm of everyday life. As the stars appeared above, they returned to Mouse's nook and shared one last story before sleep. Hedgehog spoke of a dream he once had about climbing the tallest tree. Mouse imagined what it would be like to follow the river to its source, An owl described the constellations slowly appearing overhead. Their laughter and voices blended with the night until, one by one, they drifted into rest. And so the whispering path faded into memory, not forgotten, but no longer pressing. The friends had discovered something equally valuable. That while mysteries might tempt them, the heart of their forest life lay in the small, steady joys of each day. The days in the forest were slowly changing. The warm sun that once lingered into the evening now dipped earlier, casting longer shadows across the woodland floor. The air was cooler too, carrying a faint crispness that whispered of the season to come. Mouse was the first to notice. She had been gathering seeds near the edge of the meadow when she paused to sniff the air. It smelled different. Dry leaves, cool soil, and the faintest hint of smoke drifting from far away, where humans burned wood in their stoves. When she returned to her nook beneath the tree roots, she found Hedgehog curled in the grass, munching lazily on a beetle he had dug up. Owl was perched on a branch above, watching with half-closed eyes. "Autumn is coming," Mouse announced, dropping her seeds into a little pile. Hedgehog licked his lips and looked up. "Autumn? Already?" "Yes," Mouse said firmly. "The nights are cooler, and the meadow plants are drying. We must begin preparing now. If we wait too long, food will be scarce." Owl blinked slowly. She's right. Soon the insects will grow fewer, the fruits will vanish, and the ground will harden. We must think of our winter stores. Hedgehog groaned. "Winter stores. Every year it sneaks up on me. Can we just enjoy the sun while it lasts?" But deep down, he knew Mouse was right. Hedgehogs like to sleep long and deep through the winter, and if he didn't eat enough before the frost came, his dreams would be uneasy. So the three friends agreed. They would begin their preparations together. They started the very next morning. Mouse took the lead, being the most skilled at finding seeds and grains. She scurried into the meadow, her whiskers twitching as she searched beneath stalks of grass. Hedgehog lumbered after her, collecting what she dropped and carrying it back on his prickles. Owl kept watch from above, swooping down now and then to point out clusters of berries hidden in the brambles. It was steady, patient work. Mouse discovered tiny caches of wild oats scattered across the soil, while Hedgehog bravely pushed through thorns to reach the juiciest berries. Owl guided them to a patch of mushrooms hidden beneath fallen leaves, reminding them to take only the safe ones and leave the rest. At the end of each day, they returned to Mouse's nook, where she carefully organized their findings. Seeds were tucked into little woven pouches of grass, berries were stored in hollowed bark, and mushrooms were laid on flat stones to dry in the sun. Hedgehog grumbled about the fuss of sorting, but even he admitted it felt good to see the supplies growing. One afternoon, while foraging near the stream, Hedgehog stumbled across something unusual. Beneath a pile of fallen leaves lay a cluster of nuts, shiny, smooth, and larger than anything he had seen before. He sniffed them curiously, then called out, "Mouse! Owl! Come quickly!" They hurried over. Mouse's eyes widened at the sight. "Chestnuts. These will keep us fed for weeks." Owl nodded approvingly. "A gift from the tall trees. We must gather them carefully before the squirrels claim them all." So they set to work. Hedgehog carried as many as he could balanced on his back. Mouse rolled them one by one toward their nook, and Owl flew ahead to scout for more. By sunset, they had collected an entire pile. That night, as they sat together beside the growing stores, Mouse felt her heart swell with contentment. With this much food, winter will not frighten us. We will be safe and warm together. Hedgehog stretched, his belly pleasantly full from sampling a nut. "Maybe autumn isn't so bad after all," he admitted with a grin. Owl hooted softly. "Each season brings its work and its gifts. All we must do is meet it with steady hearts." And so the friends continued their preparations day after day until their stores were full. The forest was changing, but in the company of one another, they felt ready for whatever lay ahead. Autumn deepened quickly. Leaves turned to gold and rust, drifting down to carpet the forest floor. The air was sharper now, and the clouds gathered more often, heavy with rain. One evening, as the friends rested near the stream, the wind began to rise. It rustled through the trees with a restless energy, carrying a chill that made Mouse shiver. Owl lifted his head, feathers ruffling. "A storm is coming," he said simply. They hurried back to their homes, carrying what little food they had gathered that day. By the time they reached the clearing, the sky had darkened and distant thunder growled. Mouse darted into her nook, arranging leaves across the doorway to block the wind. Hedgehog squeezed in beside her, determined to keep her company through the storm. Owl perched on the root above, wings tucked tight against the rain. The storm broke suddenly, with a roar of wind and sheets of rain. The trees bent and groaned, their branches thrashing. Lightning split the sky, followed by a crack of thunder that made Mouse flinch. Hedgehog pressed closer to her, muttering, "It's only noise, nothing more." Inside the small nook, the three huddled together. Water dripped from the ceiling, but Mouse quickly stuffed moss into the cracks to keep them dry. Hedgehog offered his prickly back as a shield against the drafts. Owl, though damp, kept watch at the doorway, his sharp eyes steady even as the storm raged. For hours, the storm battered the forest. They listened to the creak of trees, the rush of water down the stream, and the endless rumble of thunder. Yet in that little nook, with their food piled safely behind them and their bodies pressed close, they felt protected. At last, the storm began to fade. The rain softened to a drizzle, and the wind slowed to a sigh. The three friends peered out of the doorway to see the damage. Branches lay scattered across the clearing, and the stream had swollen, spilling over its banks. But their nook had held strong, and their stores were safe. Mouse let out a long breath. "We made it." Hedgehog yawned, already drowsy after the long night. "Next time, let's sleep through it." Owl chuckled softly. "Storms come and go. What matters is that we endure them together." And with that, the three returned to their rest, lulled to sleep by the gentle patter of rain. A few days after the storm, the forest seemed to breathe easier. The air was fresh, washed clean by the rain, and the sun shone warmly on the wet leaves. Mouse suggested they take a walk to the meadow to see what the storm had uncovered. Hedgehog agreed eagerly. He was tired of being cooped up, and Owl joined from above. When they reached the meadow, they found it glittering with raindrops, each blade of grass sparkling like glass. But something else caught their attention. Near the far edge, where the soil had been loosened by the storm, a dark patch of earth stood out. Curious, they went closer. There, half buried in the soil, lay a cluster of roots unlike any they had seen. They were plump, pale, and sweet-smelling. Mouse sniffed. "Wild carrots," she exclaimed. Hedgehog's eyes lit up. "Carrots? Oh, I love carrots." Owl nodded thoughtfully. "A gift from the storm. It has unearthed what lay hidden." The three dug carefully, pulling out one carrot after another. They tasted them, crisp, earthy, and delicious. Mouse carried a few back to her nook. Hedgehog filled his belly, and Owl saved some for later, knowing the others would enjoy them again. As the sun set over the meadow, the friends sat together, sharing the unexpected treasure. The storm had been fierce, but it had left behind a gift, reminding them that even in hardship, something good could grow. Mouse leaned against Hedgehog, nibbling a piece of carrot. "I'm glad we came today. Who knows what else the forest hides, waiting to be found." Owl gazed at the meadow, his feathers glowing in the orange light. The forest always keeps its secrets, but it shares them little by little with those who listen. The three sat quietly, watching the stars appear, their hearts full of gratitude. And as the night deepened, they returned home, knowing that the days ahead, whatever they brought, would be faced together with steady paws, wings, and hearts. The morning after a misty rain, Hedgehog trundled through the woods, his nose twitching as he searched for something interesting to chew on. His paws sank softly into the damp ground, and drops of water clung to his bristles. Mouse followed, hopping lightly over puddles, while Owl glided silently above, keeping watch. Not far from the stream, Hedgehog stopped suddenly. "Look," he called, pointing his snout toward a fallen tree. The log was massive, hollow through the center, its bark softened with moss and fungi. The storm weeks before must have finally toppled it. Mouse's eyes sparkled. "It looks like a tunnel." Without waiting, she darted inside, her whiskers brushing the damp wood. Hedgehog, curious but cautious, waddled in after her. Owl perched on top, tilting his head as he listened to their muffled footsteps. Inside, the log smelled rich, earthy and damp, but not unpleasant. Shafts of light peeked through cracks in the bark, painting stripes of gold on the wooden walls. Mouse squeaked happily. "It's wonderful in here. We could use this for something." Hedgehog snorted. "Something like what?" "It's just a log." But Mouse shook her head. "Not just a log. Think about it. When winter comes, this could be a place to gather. Safe, dry, hidden away." Owl hooted from above. "She's right. The hollow log could serve us well, but it must be cleaned and made ready." So the friends set to work. Hedgehog used his strong snout to push out old leaves and bits of rotten wood. Mouse gathered dry grass and soft moss to line the inside. Owl flew off and returned with small sprigs of pine, their needles filling the air with a fresh scent. By midday, the hollow log had been transformed. It was no longer just a damp old tree. It was a shelter, cozy and inviting, with a floor of moss and grass and a faint smell of pine. Hedgehog flopped onto the bedding with a grunt. "Now this," he declared, "is a fine place for a nap." Mouse giggled and curled beside him. Owl hopped inside, tucking his wings carefully, and for a while, the three simply rested, listening to the quiet hum of the forest. They decided then that the hollow log would be their shared refuge, a place to meet when the air grew colder or storms blew in. It wasn't grand, but it was theirs, and that was enough. As the days shortened, food became harder to find. The meadow was thinning out, the berry bushes nearly bare, and insects fewer with each passing night. One crisp evening, Mouse returned to the hollow log carrying only a small seed. She dropped it with a sigh. "It's getting harder," she admitted. "Soon I won't find enough on my own." Hedgehog frowned, his belly grumbling. "We'll manage. There's always something if you look long enough." Owl, who had been watching the twilight sky, spoke quietly. "There is something we can try. The fireflies are gathering at the edge of the marsh. Their light might guide us to hidden food." Mouse tilted her head. "But how do we keep their light with us? We can't carry fireflies." Hedgehog shuffled, then brightened. "What if we make a lantern?" It was a silly idea at first, but Mouse's eyes lit up. She gathered a hollow acorn shell, smooth and sturdy, while Hedgehog rolled over a piece of thin bark. Owl fetched strands of spider silk, left behind on old branches. Together, they crafted a tiny lantern, an acorn shell lined with bark, held together with the silk and open at the top. That night, when the fireflies rose, Mouse gently coaxed a few into the acorn lantern. To their delight, the little insects glowed happily, casting a warm green light. With their lantern leading the way, the friends wandered deeper into the woods. The fireflies illuminated hidden corners, nuts tucked beneath roots, mushrooms hidden under leaves, and even a patch of late-season berries overlooked by other animals. By the time the lantern dimmed, their paws and backs were full of food. They returned to the hollow log laughing, their spirits high. Hedgehog set down his load with a huff. Who knew bugs could help us eat better? Mouse held up the acorn lantern proudly. We'll keep this safe. Whenever food grows scarce, it will light our way. Owl blinked slowly, the glow of the fireflies reflecting in his eyes. The forest gives us what we need, if we're clever enough to see it. From then on, the forager's lantern became part of their lives, a little tool born from friendship and imagination. One morning, the forest woke to silence. The stream still trickled, the leaves still whispered, but the air was sharper, colder, biting at whiskers and feathers alike. Hedgehog's paws crunched as he stepped outside, and he gasped when he looked down. "Frost!" he cried. Mouse darted out from her nook, eyes wide. The grass glittered silver, every blade tipped with ice. Even the last autumn leaves wore a thin, shining coat. Owl spread his wings from his perch, watching the frozen meadow with calm interest. "It has begun," he said softly. "Winter is near." At first, the frost was frightening. Mouse worried the ground would soon be too hard to dig. Hedgehog fretted that insects would vanish completely. Owl knew he could hunt, but even he felt the weight of the changing season. Yet, as they walked through the frosted forest, wonder replaced their fear. The world sparkled as though dusted with stars, every branch and pebble gleaming in the pale light. Their breaths puffed in little clouds, and the air smelled crisp and clean. Mouse scampered ahead, her tiny paws leaving trails in the frost. "Look at this. We can write in the grass." She drew shapes with her steps, laughing. Hedgehog followed, stomping out his own wide tracks. Owl swooped low, leaving wing marks in the glittering frost. By midday, the frost melted and the world returned to its usual colors. But the memory of that sparkling morning stayed with them. That evening, the three gathered inside the hollow log. Their stores of seeds, nuts, and dried berries surrounded them, a comfort against the chill creeping into the air. Hedgehog yawned and curled into the moss. Mouse nestled at his side, and Owl tucked his feathers tight. "Winter is near," Owl repeated softly. "But we are ready." Mouse closed her eyes, smiling. "Yes, whatever comes, we'll face it together." And so, as frost touched the forest night after night, the friends rested in their hollow log, their hearts warm with the knowledge that their simple lives, gathering, sharing, and caring, were enough to carry them through the turning of the seasons. The wind had begun to change. It no longer carried the sweet scent of summer grass, but instead smelled of damp soil, wood smoke from faraway farms, and the faint sharpness of cold. Each gust rattled the thinning trees, and the ground grew littered with fallen leaves. Mouse darted happily through them, squeaking with delight. She loved how they crunched beneath her paws, how she could bury herself in a pile and peek out again. Hedgehog, on the other hand, found them useful. He waddled slowly, gathering leaves on his spines, carrying them back to the hollow log. "Why are you taking so many?" Mouse asked as she shook leaves from her whiskers. "For bedding, of course," Hedgehog replied. "When the frost comes harder, you'll be glad for a soft blanket." Owl watched from above, perched on a branch swaying in the wind. "It is wise. The leaves keep warmth, and warmth keeps life." So they spent the day gathering. Hedgehog rolled through piles, carrying them on his back. Mouse dragged smaller ones in her mouth, often dropping them along the way, but cheerfully going back for more. Owl flew above, spotting the brightest, driest leaves and calling out directions. By the time the sun dipped low, the hollow log was transformed. The floor was thick with soft layers, the corners neatly padded. A little pile even sat near the entrance, where Mouse insisted she would make a tiny nest of her own. That evening, as the wind howled through the bare branches, the three friends curled up together. Hedgehog snored softly, Mouse nestled into the leaves, and Owl tucked his head beneath his wing. Outside, the forest rustled and groaned, but inside their log, it was warm, quiet, and safe. One chilly morning, Mouse returned from foraging with a worried look. She carried nothing, her whiskers drooping. "What's wrong?" Hedgehog asked. "I buried an acorn weeks ago," she squeaked. "I marked the spot with 3 pebbles. But when I went back today, it was gone." "Gone?" Hedgehog tilted his head. "Maybe you forgot the place." But Mouse shook her head firmly. "No, I never forget. Someone took it." Owl, perched solemnly, blinked slowly. Many animals store food. Squirrels, jays, even badgers. Perhaps it was found by another in need. Mouse's little paws curled. "But it was mine." To cheer her up, Hedgehog suggested they search together. The 3 set out, retracing Mouse's steps. The forest floor was busy with others, squirrels dashing with cheeks full, birds tucking seeds into crevices, and chipmunks scurrying back to burrows. At the marked spot, sure enough, the acorn was gone. Only the pebbles remained. Mouse sighed heavily, but then Owl noticed something. Just a short distance away, a young squirrel was struggling with an acorn nearly as big as her head. She looked thin, her fur patchy from the cold. The acorn, it looked very familiar. Mouse froze, torn between anger and pity. "She must have taken it," Hedgehog whispered. The little squirrel paused, noticing them. Her eyes widened, and she hugged the acorn tightly as though afraid they'd steal it back. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Mouse's expression softened. She stepped closer and squeaked gently. "Keep it. You need it more." The squirrel blinked, surprised. She chattered something in return, a thank you in her own way, before darting off with the acorn. Hedgehog huffed. "That was yours. You could have taken it back." Mouse shook her head, smiling faintly. "The forest gave me more than enough. If she's hungry, then it's hers now." Owl's golden eyes gleamed. A gift given freely returns in ways unseen. When they went back to the hollow log, Mouse no longer looked sad. Instead, she felt lighter, as though kindness itself was a kind of food. Late one afternoon, the friends climbed a ridge near the edge of the woods. The air was crisp, their breath puffing in little clouds. Hedgehog grumbled at the steepness, but Mouse scampered easily over roots and rocks, and Owl glided ahead, calling them upward. When they reached the top, the sight stopped them all. The horizon was ablaze, not with real fire, but with colors. The sun was setting, and the entire sky glowed in shades of orange, pink, and crimson. Clouds stretched like painted brushstrokes, and the forest below was bathed in golden light. Mouse gasped. "It looks like the world is burning, but it's beautiful." Hedgehog sat heavily, his eyes wide. "I've never seen it like this. I thought the sun just went down." Owl's feathers caught the glow, turning him into a silhouette edged with flame. The sky tells stories of its own. This one is about change. They sat in silence, watching as the colors deepened, shifting to purple and deep blue. The trees cast long shadows, and the first stars blinked awake. The forest grew hushed, as though listening to the sky itself. For Hedgehog, the sunset was a reminder that even endings could be beautiful. For Mouse, it was a promise that no matter how dark the night, light would always return. For Owl, it was a memory of countless evenings watched in silence, each one unique, each one fleeting. When the last glow faded, they made their way back down the ridge. Hedgehog grumbled about the steep path again, Mouse laughed, and Owl guided them safely with his keen eyes. That night, inside the hollow log, Mouse whispered sleepily, "The fire in the sky will keep me warm in dreams." And with that, the friends drifted into sleep, carrying the memory of the autumn sunset in their hearts. Thanks so much for listening and being part of the journey. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button, subscribe, and share it with a friend who loves adventures. There's plenty more to come, so make sure to come back for the next chapter.